Hello, everyone. We are in the studio today with Virginia and George Lester. They are the parents of Al Lester. And unfortunately, Al Lester was tragically killed by a teen drunk driver in 1992 in upstate New York. He was doing an endurance event and he lost his life. So we're going to learn more today about some of the great things Al did. He was an avid cyclist here in the greater Boston area. And we're going to learn more about what his parents have done to make sure this does not happen to anybody else ever again. Al's mom was moved to speak at high schools to share her son's story to make sure that kids understand the repercussions that go along with drinking and driving. So I'm going to let Virginia tell you her son's story in her own words.
Our son, Albert Lester, wanted to be a teacher, but he was killed on his bicycle by a teenage drunk driver. His body dumped dead in a ditch by a young person he would have loved to have helped. With his death, education lost a teacher, recreation a volunteer leader, and we lost our son and our other son's only brother. And the world lost a friend. Well, it was prom night in Fulton County, New York. They had a safe night at the prom, but not everyone went to the prom. There were 5 boys. 2 were 19, 1 18, and his brother was 16, and his friend was 14. Well, the oldest one had a fake ID and a big idea. He persuaded the 18-year-old to borrow his mother's car. They pooled their resources and went to a package store. Took less than a minute. The oldest one dashed in and dashed out. There were 3 cases of beer stashed in the trunk of the car. The kids took off for a wooded campsite. Well, meanwhile, in the county, a big sports event was going on, a tourist attraction, a 24-hour bicycle challenge. There were 70 top bicyclists from all over the eastern United States and Canada bicycling around a 42-mile loop of rural road, testing their endurance for the race across America. And one of those cyclists was our son, Albert Lester. Albert was 31, a graduate of MIT. He had recently given up his engineering career to prepare to teach high school mathematics and science. He had said he wanted to do something more socially meaningful with his life than his high-tech job could offer, and he wanted to be a part of the future by teaching. Here at Westwood High School, he was in the class of 1978, and here he excelled in math and science and foreign languages, and he loved art history. He sang in school musicals, acted in class plays. He ran track and was on the math team. He was a star scout, and he enjoyed camping and model rocketry and astronomy. And he enjoyed doing all the fun things that kids like to do. But just before his junior year, when he was looking forward to his 16th birthday and driver ed, Albert suffered a seizure stemming from a childhood head injury. As a result, by motor vehicle law, he could never consume any alcohol or fool around with any drugs. They tend to trigger seizures. And he could not be licensed to drive a car for 2 more years. So while his friends got their licenses and drove family cars, Albert put on a helmet and he took to his bicycle as a means of transportation. And when he graduated from MIT in 1982, he had promised to visit his grandmother down south. He kept that promise by going on his bicycle from Boston to Miami and back up to Atlanta, Chattanooga, and to Washington, D.C. And he got back to MIT just in time to help the new students come. Well, that was the first of many long-distance bicycling trips, and over the next 10 years, he bicycled more than 50,000 miles in this country and in Europe.
Very powerful, right? Definitely powerful. Now we're going to go to a part 2 of the video where Virginia is going to tell you about the accident and what actually happened to her son.
So, what happened? What happened to that dream? And why is it that now I go to high schools and tell Albert's story instead of Albert being there to teach? Well, the bicyclists met at noon Saturday, June 6, 1992, in front of the historic Fulton County Courthouse in Johnstown, New York. The bicycle route course was a pretty route winding through the foothills of the Adirondacks, and I'm sure Albert enjoyed his ride that afternoon and was well lighted for the night ride. But shortly after midnight, on a straight stretch of road on the course, a car going 95 miles an hour passed a slower moving vehicle and crashed head-on, not into Albert, but into one of Albert's cycling friends, Andrew Spiller. Andy was dragged, his foot torn off, his body mangled. The car hit an embankment, went up in the air, flipped over, blew apart. The driver fell out, and the car engine landed on top of him. Andy was 26, and he was nicknamed by the bicyclists Mr. Safety. The driver was 18 and very drunk, and neither one survived. Well, the event was called off immediately, but no one got to Albert to get him off the road. He continued to bicycle uphill on the white shoulder line where all well-trained, experienced cyclists ride. In 14 hours, he had bicycled 228 miles. Meanwhile, remember the boys with the beer back at the campsite? Well, beer's sort of like peanuts or popcorn, potato chips. Imagine one potato chip. M&Ms, Oreos, whatever your favorite junk food is, like those puffy little cheese things. It's hard to have just one, and it's easy to lose count after two. But even a small amount of alcohol can affect one's judgment, and that's the first thing to go. It affects one's judgment and concentration and reflex actions, essentials for safe driving. Well, two of the boys had passed out, and the other three wanted to go home. They had lost their good sense and headed for the car. The two brothers even argued over which one would drive, but beer has a way of making one feel overly confident, indestructible, like, I can do anything. Nothing's ever going to happen to me. And the 18-year-old tried to drive after drinking. They made it less than 5 miles down the road. They were driving south, downhill. Albert was pedaling north, uphill. Speeding and weaving all over the road at a downhill curve, the car crossed the center line into the opposite shoulder and crashed head-on into Albert. Albert was catapulted off his bike onto the hood of the car and crashed into the windshield. Glass went in on the boys. They swerved, and Albert was flung off into the ditch. The car went on downhill, ran off the other side of the road, rolled over, and landed on its roof. Now, somehow, the three boys climbed out the back window. They were not hurt, but they were scared, and they ran off in different directions. But not far off the road, the beer and the fear caught up with the driver. He passed out, and he slept in the woods until dawn. And when he did wake up, he was disoriented and got lost and wandered out onto a different road. And who should be the first person to come along to pick him up? His mother. She had been out looking for him during the night while his father and older brother waited and searched nearer the crash site. Well, meanwhile, at home here in Westwood, 200 miles away, I had become extremely nervous, strangely so, all afternoon and into the night. And about midnight, I finally just went to the basement to start a project that Albert was going to help me do when he got back. I worked hard for 2 hours, and then I stopped and I wondered if Albert would be proud of me. And somehow, in one of those strange mysteries of life, these words came to me. I'm proud of you. You've always done all you could for me, Mom. I'm in good hands now. Go to bed and get some sleep. You're going to need your rest. As I passed through the kitchen, I noticed the time. That turned out to be the exact time when the county DWI patrol came on the scene. Albert's bicycle strewn in pieces down the road, leading to the overturned car, and no one in sight. And early that morning, I held my husband's hand as we opened the door for 2 local police officers who had the task of notifying us the death of our son, our dear sweet Albert. They told us the hardest thing any parent ever has to do is to bury their child.
Welcome back, everyone. Powerful videos there from the Lester family. Again, Al tragically lost his life to a teenage drunk driver doing an endurance cycling race. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and actually talk to Virginia and George Lester. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, Virginia and George, for coming into the studio today. We definitely appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for having us. I always enjoy talking about Albert. And he was a wonderful son, very good.
And what is that you have in your hand there?
It's a little card we had made up. We didn't know to have something like this made up at the time he died. So when they were going to have the first 20th anniversary, after 20 years, I had become acquainted with a person who was a funeral director, and I knew they had little cards. So I asked him if he would help me come up with a card that I could have something to give to the bicyclists when they came. And so this is what he made up. On the front of it, this is a family saying. I have no idea where it came from or what it means.
Mm-hmm. What does it say?
Joy go with you, and peace stay behind. And that became my little way of dealing with this, saying goodbye and trying to deal with what was left behind to deal with.
It's a wonderful card. I want to ask you, what is the ring? I see you're wearing this ring around your neck, and it looks like it has some sentimental value. What is that?
This is Albert's MIT ring, the brass beaver they call it, and he graduated in 1982, and it was the weekend of the 10th anniversary for his graduation, he had planned to go to the to the reunion, but he'd also planned to go to the event. Only he didn't realize until the last minute. It was the same weekend.
So it was the same
So-
weekend, his reunion, his MIT reunion,
Yes.
and his cycling
This
endurance event were on the
endurance
same
event.
weekends.
And
he ended up going to the endurance event.
right. So he wanted to be a teacher. And somehow, with a little of this and a little of that, I became involved in going to school after school after school. They would just call. It was sort of word of mouth would get around, and I never charged anything. It was, I mean, I never thought to do that. It was just my way of giving Albert something, some way he could teach. I couldn't do math and science that he would have, but I hope that, and I think that a lot of young people got the message, because the driver who killed Albert, and he was very, very remorseful about it, he was a teenager who just lost his good sense to drinking beer. And one after another, and so on, at a wooded campsite, like it says. And as I would tell the story, not only of Albert, who the kids could say he might have been a good teacher, but then the story about the young man. And they go, uh-oh, look down at each other. Are you listening?
That's how the kids would kind of nudge each other to make sure they're listening to you.
Would look, and you could tell they were drinking it in. And one high school I especially remember was here in Somerville. It was one of my favorite high schools. It was big, but the first time I was there, they took me on a tour, and I saw all these different rooms for wonderful things that the kids learned to do. There was dance, there was drama, there was wood shop and metal shop.
Okay.
And then afterwards, they took me for lunch in their cafeteria or their lunchroom, and it was students who served, and some had prepared the lunch. And I just thought it was wonderful. But also, one thing about it, I saw all these kids down here, and I thought I was speaking to them. But at some point, I looked up, and whoops,
And there were
there's
a whole bunch of other
level
kids around.
there.
Well, that's a great thing that you were doing, Virginia. I think going to these schools and talking to these young kids about driving and drinking and driving. And also, if you're a parent today and you're watching this show and you have a teenage child at home, you should definitely pull them into the room so you can see these parents who lost their son to a drunk driver who was a teenager. By all means, this is a very, very, very important show. And I think that was very important of you and very brave of you to go around to these many, many high schools for many years sharing Albert's story. So let's talk about some of the bike rides that he's done. Some of you shared a story about him riding all the way to Florida and Georgia.
For his first bike ride, after he graduated from MIT, he had promised to see his grandmother, and he went on his bicycle. And I told him, now you call us and we'll come get you if you're north of New York. But after that, you're on your own. And he didn't call. I was sort of like, oh dear, he didn't call. So he was on his own. But he had lined up, he left us with his itinerary, a map, and a day by day where he was going to stay.
Okay.
So he really took all the arguments away from me. I asked him, how was he going to cross the Appalachian Mountains? And he said, going down the coast and come back up the other side. What could I do? So that's what he did. And we had relatives and friends all along that corridor. And he'd call them up ahead of time, I'm coming.
Okay, so he was able to stop along and stay with family and friends, maybe some hostels.
Yes, and stay at hostels.
And to get down to see his grandparents.
His first hostel he stayed in, I called up a little after 10 to see if he was there and had been all right. And the kid who answered the phone said, Mom, it's Albert's mother. And she came and said, Albert's fine, he's eating well. He had a good night's sleep. He looks healthy, and he left about 10 minutes ago.
Wonderful,
And
wonderful.
she says everybody waits until after 10 to call.
So they won't embarrass the kids, right?
So they won't embarrass the kids.
Right. Is there something there you want to read from one of the
there's several
hostels?
things. This was the local rides. This was Blue Moon. This is back in 88. Blue Moon. Blue Moons don't happen every year, and neither do rides like this. Meet at 8 p.m. at the Minuteman statue in Lexington Center for a 15 to 20 mile ride. This will be a once in a very blue moon experience. Leader Al Lester, and his phone number. And there were several others that were the same sort of thing.
It's very important to point out one thing that we had not mentioned yet, that he led a lot of rides. He was very active here with CRW, the Charles River Wheelmen, and many other rides here in the Boston area and the greater Boston area.
Yes, I might mention with the Charles River Wheelmen, they very nicely made this. This is a mock-up or
right
of what it was going to be over at the bike trail in Lexington. And it has meant a great deal to us to go over and visit the rock, plant flowers. It's time to go put some fall flowers in. And people stop and talk with us. That's nice.
So George, let me ask you, you've been quiet there. Let me ask you about his Paris-Brest-Paris ride and some of his international rides.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us, Melanie. We really appreciate it, having a chance to talk with you.
Absolutely.
I think the first one, let me mention, was in 1985. He came home and told me he was going over to see the Tour de France. And I said, the Tour de what? Probably, because I really didn't know much about it. But he went, and he took his bicycle, he had to put it in a crate, and he took it on the plane, and when he got to Orly, I think, airport, he uncrated the bicycle, gave the crate to someone else who was there waiting to use it, and he rode his bicycle into the center of Paris from the airport, can you imagine, and went to the youth hostel there. And he stayed there for a few nights and looked around some, and then he took the train down to Grenoble. And he had picked out a time to watch part of the Tour de France on a day that was a time trial. And not only that, but it was a time trial that was a loop. It came back to the same place in a town, I won't try to pronounce it, but a little bit southwest of Grenoble.
Okay.
And he went there, and he told me, one of the things he told me when it came back is that he went to a place to watch along the road. You've seen that, people do that.
Absolutely.
And he decided to move to another place. And he said as he was riding along, people would clap as he went by. So be that as it may, it was kind of a fun thing. But then he went from there across Switzerland and then along the Rhine River to Frankfurt. And he flew back from Frankfurt and had a great time. And in '91, he took a number of qualifying rides, and he went on this Paris-Brest-Paris, which is a ride that's done every 4 years. And it's 750 miles.
Right.
It has to be done in 90 hours.
Right.
And he completed that in about 87 hours. And people told us that he could have done it faster, but he stopped to try to talk to people along the road.
Oh, how special
and had a
is
great
that?
time. And he stopped, of course, some places to rest and sleep.
Right.
But that was what he did there. And then he came back from that one. And that was in '91. And the next year, of course, we know what happened.
Right. His death was in '92. You know, we're gonna take a quick break.
Sure.
We're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna come back and talk to you and hear some more stories about Albert and Albert's life. Folks, we'll be right back. We're back, everyone. Thanks again for joining us tonight. We're in the studio with Virginia and George Lester. They are the parents of Al Lester. And if you're just joining us, Al Lester was tragically killed in 1992 in a bicycling endurance event. So we're learning some great things about Al's life and some of the wonderful things that we did. You just finished sharing with us his rides in Europe. And were there any other international rides or long rides? Did he ride long distance within the U.S.?
The only other one perhaps to mention is one that's done every year, and that's from Boston to Montreal and back.
Right.
And that's also a 750-mile ride.
Yes.
And I don't know that there's any special time that has to be completed, but at any rate, it's done every year. And he did that one with a number of other people from this area and enjoyed doing all of those.
Okay.
And again, there are no other international ones that he went on.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
You know, I know that you spent a lot of time going, you and your wife spent a lot of time going from various schools. Was that only in Massachusetts, or did you?
No, I went back to upstate New York. They invited me to come back to the area where this had happened and speak in the schools up there. And also to speak to the first offenders, it's called. And I took with me to one of those times the busted wheel from Albert's bike. When I spoke,
I'm just going to hold it up here because we
Please.
have it here.
when I spoke
busted
with
wheel.
the offenders, the drunk drivers, and I didn't know it, but there was a class of SAD students there also. And when I went to speak in one of the schools, one of the boys said, "Did you bring the wheel?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't take it to the schools because I want people to enjoy bicycling, that's important." He said, "That's the best thing you did, was to bring that wheel." And he said he'd been at a stag party, and they all had been drinking, and they started to leave, and he just planted himself at the door, said, "No, we'll take a taxi." And they did. I do want to bring in a little something
Sure. What is that?
about his traveling. Traveling in Europe in 1985, I met people from more than 24 different countries. My last night in Frankfurt, I sat in a room talking with hostelers from Korea, Canada, and Algeria. Despite the language barrier, we were able to use a pocket atlas to point out where we were from. In between, there were people from Mali, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, and too many other countries to list here. Many possibilities. Along Commonwealth Avenue, in the Back Bay section of Boston, there is a statue of Samuel Eliot Morrison, sailor, writer, adventurer, whose inscription I read for the first time 8 years ago before my first trip. I have never forgotten it. At the base of the statue, there is an inscription that says, "Dream dreams, then write them down. I but live them first." And that's what he was doing. And when he would have a meeting, once he had a meeting in Austin, and he had something else going on in New Orleans. So he took his bike and biked across Texas. Another time it was from Los Angeles up to San Francisco. Once he had something going on in Philadelphia, and he and someone else went down, Lindy King, went down on their bikes, and they got in Connecticut, and this man was going by, and he stopped, and he said, "So where are you going, and do you have a place to stay tonight? Here are the keys to my house. I'm going out." And they stayed there. He said, "Help yourself to the food, anything there."
Well, that was very, very nice of him.
Wonderful, wonderful
Very nice of him.
experiences. But it was these travels that led Albert to want to be a teacher. It helped him develop his social skills and leadership skills and communication skills. And this is something he wrote in his application to Harvard Graduate School, where he was going to go that September. "Education is a necessary and important part of life. There is no such thing as being too old to learn new things, and not all learning takes place in a classroom. I've learned from experience, travel is one of the greatest educational experiences in existence. During my bicycling trips through the United States and Europe, I have met people from around the world. I have learned about traveling, about the places I visited and the people who live there, and most importantly, about myself.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. Again, so sorry for your loss.
Well, that's kind
Sounds
of
like
it. Thank you.
sounds like somebody I would have loved to have met. George, what do you want our audience, and what do you want people to know about Al that we may not know?
Well, that's a big question, Melanie. I think, as Virginia said, he was somebody who was interested in people and in wanting ultimately to become a teacher, because he had worked in a software job up to that time for a company that sent the weather pictures to TV stations. And I think he just got sort of burned out on that and decided to change. And he went back to one of his teachers in Westwood that he liked and discussed it all with him and made the decision to try and make a change. And he gave up his job at this place at the end of 91, beginning of 92, and during that spring, he made another ride down to Florida and came back through, in this case, back through part of Indiana and to Pittsburgh, where a friend of his lived, and rode back from there. And then after that, he went in June out to Gloversville in Fulton County, New York, where he ultimately was killed. And I think those are just a few of the things to remember about him, and we hope that people, as Virginia said, who listened, who heard what had happened to him, would listen carefully and not let themselves get, now this was from the young man who did it, as a matter of fact. He hoped that they would listen carefully and not get involved in that kind of thing themselves.
And those are words from the young man who did it.
That's right,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, those are words from the young man who did it.
Something different about Albert. He liked music very much, and he used to stop at the library and bring us home classical music to have for dinner. And I thought that was wonderful. He'd put books back on the shelf. He was very helpful around the community and different things of that sort. Sometimes we forget, but I loved that classical music during dinner.
Well, I'm so glad that you all were able to come in this afternoon and share your son with us. And I'm sure that your talks and your videos have probably helped some young person out there. Again, if you're a parent with a teenage child, this is a very important show. Their son was killed by a drunk teenage driver. And we don't want that happening again to anyone. And I know you don't want to see any other family go through what you went through. So we're going to take a we're going to take a break. But before we go to break, because when we come back from break, there's an Al Lester Memorial Ride coming up on September 26th, and we're going to talk to someone who's very prominent in Al's life, who's also going to be on the ride, and she's going to talk to us more about Al and talk to us more about the ride and how you can join the ride. Was there something else you wanted to say before we go to break?
This is a straight piece off of Albert's bicycle. And if I need power, I hold this. And I hold his ring, or I do something like that, and I feel the power.
All right now. That's how Virginia feels the power.
So, and this is just a little something that was written in a youth.
You know what? Hold that thought. We're going to go to break, and I'm going to let you read that when we talk to Ellen when we come back. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back, everyone. We have added Ellen Google to our panel, and Ellen is one of the ride organizers for the Al Lester Memorial Ride. This is the third time that they've done the ride, so we're going to learn more about the ride. She was also a friend of Al Lester. She knew him. So sorry for your loss, even though it's 1992. I'm sure it still pains you when you think about him.
I still think about him a lot.
How did you guys meet?
Through American Youth Hostels. We were both travelers and bicyclists, and then we came back to the local council. We both served on the board, and we were both on the program and touring committee.
So
leading rides and so forth.
So tell us about the Al Lester Memorial Ride that's coming up?
Well, this is courtesy of Virginia, although, so this is his handwritten, he wrote this himself.
Wow.
It's just the map. We made a cue sheet out of it.
Right, right.
But this is a ride that goes right by the Lester's house. They still live in the house where Al grew up in Westwood. And we start at the Sheehan School, the Sheehan Elementary School in Westwood. It's going to be at 10 o'clock on Saturday, September 26th. And it's a 30-mile loop that goes right by his house. As Virginia explained to me when she first gave me this, when she was going through Al's things a few years ago, this is the ride where Al would say, do you remember, Mom, I'm going around the block.
Yes.
He was a teenager, and you're like, okay. He's 30 miles later.
Yeah.
So it starts in Westwood, all beautiful roads that we're used to in the CRW, in Sherburne, Dover, and over to Medfield. In Medfield, we're going to stop for lunch at Meeting House Pond, that's it. And in the past, Virginia and George have met us there with snacks and cookies. Al's favorite cookies, the sand
Sand tarts.
That's
okay.
it. And this year we're also offering another add-on loop, so we have a 40-mile version. And I should mention here, I have two friends from way back also who have helped organize this ride. Mike Schutenberg served with myself and Al on the AYH board back in the day. We were all friends and rode together, and Eric Ferrioli from Wellesley is has added on the 40-mile version as well. So he's helping with the arrowing. It's going to be fully arrowed. It's all free. People can learn more at crw.org. If you click down to rides this month, and you'll see it down there when you scroll down to September 26th.
That's fantastic. Again, if you missed that, you can learn more at crw.org. The ride is Saturday, September 26th, starting at 10 a.m., and it's free. You know, not many rides are free nowadays. You got to sponsor, or you got to raise money. You can just come out. That area is very beautiful. The Dover, Sherborne area, I ride out there a lot. It's just absolutely beautiful. Now, I see you holding a book in your hand.
So
what is that?
Al Lester, like I said, I still think about him all the time. You know, we're about the same. You know, we were the same age, so he'd be my age now if he, 23 years later. But in 1990, this book was published. You know, we didn't have internet or ride with GPS.
What is the book?
It's Bike Rides in New England by Paul Thomas, and I want to read a paragraph. He had some really classic rides here, including Tour of Scenic Rural Vermont, one of our favorites. It was 100 miles each day over a weekend. Annual tour, Tosroff East, TOSRV, sponsored by Greater Boston Council of American Youth Hostels. That's what we were called then. Al Lester, the organization's president and touring director, has earned his status in New England as one of New England's premier bike tour organizers. And he was not even 30 years old at the time. Two of his annual American Youth Hostel tours, the Tour of Scenic Rural Vermont and the Cape in a Day Ride, have won mythic reputations in the regional cycling scene. Both are included in this section. He goes on to say they're for serious cyclists only. But, he certainly, at his age, had done so much. And I thought at the time, and I said this at his funeral, that I thought he had introduced probably 1,000 people to different tours, over the course of...
Well, that's got to make you feel really good.
I'd forgotten that. Thank you for
I estimated that over 1,000 people.
Yeah, that's huge to introduce over 1,000 people to cycling.
Maybe they were the same people over and over again, but he accommodated.
Yeah, and then to be called out in a book there for such great cycling rides and routes and everything. That's got to make you feel real good. And it sounds like even though he's not teaching, you've taught in his place after his death.
I'm so glad you said that, because it makes me feel good to know that somehow we carried on that teaching thing.
You did.
This was something that was written by, in the youth thing. Can I read it?
Sure, absolutely.
I think what I'd like people to remember, he was fun, he was intelligent, and he loved bicycling. Al Lester was an exceptionally bright and articulate individual, respected by his colleagues and all who met him. His gift of listening to individuals, and don't we all need to learn that more, to listen to people, and in turn helping them clarify their positions and analyze problems, was outstanding. Al stimulated others to work at solutions and to work as a team. He will be sorely missed. He left us and also his brother, young George. And he has a nephew. He didn't know, but his nephew is named for him. And he just left this week for his first job. So all grown up now. It's hard.
All right, we've got only a few minutes left here, and I know there's one more thing that you want to read, and I'm going to let you read that.
All right, when I would say, oh, I can't do this, it's too hard, Albert would run upstairs and he'd come back down with his poem. It was his favorite poem. If you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. If you think you'll lose, you're lost. For out in the world we find success begins with the fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. Life's battles don't always go through the stronger or faster man. Soon or late, the man who wins is the one who thinks he can.
The man who wins is the one who thinks he can. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Virginia. And thank you, George, for coming in this afternoon. We really appreciate you sharing your son with us. And we'll make sure that we announce that ride. Again, the Al Lester Memorial Ride is September 26th at 9 a.m.
10.
10.
Oh, 10 a.m., not 9 a.m. Thank you.